All right, here we go with chapter 7 of the Caro-Kann course. And here we will be looking at the two knights variation. So this comes after e4, c6. White can either start with knight c3 or knight f3 here. We're going to look at knight c3, and they'll transpose. And now our recommended line is going to take us into something very similar to the Tartakower variations that we looked at in the last two chapters. After d takes e4, knight takes e4, we're recommending knight f6, offering this trade straight away. And one thing that Jesse's pointing out here with the d pawn is if white plays d4 in any of these lines coming up, you can pretty much go back and find the equivalent line in one of the Tartakower chapters, or the plans will be very similar to those chapters. So what we're going to look at in this chapter are all the lines where white does not play d4. So we'll see a lot of like move 5, move 6 deviations, just to avoid the lines with d4 for white.
Yep, so this chapter is a bit, I would say, of like a grab bag because we're trying really hard to avoid transpositions. So this is kind of everything that just like more offbeat sideline stuff that's still important to know. So first we're going to look at what happens if white plays knight takes and doubles our f-pawns. So we're going to be consistent with the repertoire and recommend f takes here, giving us these double f-pawns that we've covered in other chapters.
Yes.
Only difference here from the mainline Tartakower is white is going to play d4, but here we're going to look everything else that white can throw at us.
So in the club level database, there's 29,000 games with d4, but a pretty solid 19,000 games with bishop to c4. So there will be two knights players that purposely don't want to play d4 because they may be aware that that transposes to a classical Caro-Kann line, which is what the Tartakower is. So you will see bishop to c4 quite a bit. So what we want to do here is keep our same setup that we saw with the Tartakower. So as sort of a recap, we want bishop d6, castle, put the rook on e8. This knight will go to d7 and then to f8. So it's the exact same types of maneuvers that we saw in the Tartakower chapters. So we're going to start with bishop d6.
Yep, exactly. And white has a couple options here too. They can either give us a check or they can castle. So we'll come back to queen e2 check. Start with castles, and we're going to copy and castle same side as well. And a few things white can play here. So of course, at any time, if they throw in d4, we're in our Tartakower. So we're going to avoid d4 and look at h3. So here we're going to play another thematic move that you've seen a lot in our other Tartakower chapter, rook over. So this A gives us a nice square for our rook on this open file. It frees up the f8 square, so our knight can maneuver over this way, and fits into our overall plan in the position. I think one important thing to note about h3 is it takes away this nice g4 square for our bishop that we would develop to quite a bit in the mainline Tartakowers.
Yeah, so oftentimes we'll wait on that bishop and develop him out last. And he might end up going to e6, targeting the bishop on c4, or he may end up going out to f5 if we want to keep the file open. So similar to the Tartakower chapters, we're going to start with knight d7 next. So let's give white the most common move that's not d4, which is d3. And then knight d7 is going to be played. This is our recommendation, head into f8. Most common move is bishop to e3, knight f8. And here I took a look at the database. Black is winning 63% against 27% for white in 59 club level games. So 63 to 27. That's a very impressive difference. Black's doing super well.
Yeah, that's over twice as good for black. I'm just curious of your opinion of why you think black is doing so much better, because objectively it's a pretty equal position and there doesn't look like there's any glaring. I mean, if anything, white has the worst structure with the double f pawns.
I think it's probably, there's a couple things going on. It's possible that the players playing black are slightly higher rated than players playing white. But I think the main thing that's at play here is the players playing black are playing this system that they consistently play game after game, and they're really familiar with the structures and the plans. Whereas the players playing white, these are two knights variation players. They're not necessarily used to going into the Tartakower type territory. And once white plays d3 instead of d4, it kind of shows that they're not playing for the center control. So like the center control is what white has to their advantage in the Tartakower variation. In this line, when white plays d3, they're not taking advantage of that extra queenside pawn. So actually, I think it's up to us to prove that we have the advantage. We're going to do things like f5, f4, bring the knight out to g6, create some pressure on white's kingside, and white eventually should be playing d4 and c4, otherwise they don't have much to play for.
Yeah, I've had the engine on the past few moves, and after white played d3, it recommended d4 on these next two moves. Like, no, just put it on d4.
Yeah. So let's go down the most common line. Let's go with queen d2, and we're going to stick with our usual plan, knight g6. And one thing that's kind of nice about this position is when you see this pawn on h3, and we saw this in one of the Tartakower chapters, you can oftentimes threaten to sacrifice our light square bishop on h3. So we're going to start with knight g6, and after rook e1, bishop f5. And the idea is we're going to line up the queen behind this bishop on f5 and threaten a sack here. So let's look at the most popular move, bishop to b3. We're lining up the sack, and already we have a really large advantage here. What does Stockfish say in this position, Jesse?
It says, just let it think a bit. It says, looks like it's settling around -2 already.
Oh, wow. So that's all due to the sacrifice. We have 4 pieces ready to attack the white king, possibly a 5th if you count the e8 rook.
Yeah, just look at how nice our bishops are right here. Our queen backing up this light square bishop, and we have this nice knight jump in too if white ever removes this knight. So all these pieces just swarming in on black's king. Looks like a very dangerous setup for white.
Yeah, swarming in on white's king. So knight h2, most common move, and now let's see how the attack unfolds. Bishop takes h3, exclam. She takes h, queen takes h. So now we're threatening to take this knight, probably with the bishop even, because that could threaten mate, but queen takes looks good too. f4, trying to defend the knight with the queen. And now we have this really fun idea. Knight h4, and the plan is actually g5, g4, g3. So Jesse and I previewed this a little bit before we started recording. And sometimes in these positions, like, attacks can run out of steam. It's hard to figure out how to continue the attack. You're down a piece. But here, this g-pawn up the board, it's really hard for white to deal with. And with best play, this is already a winning position for black.
Yep, so if g4, white cannot take this pawn. So that's like the very first thing to check. Let's say white takes this pawn. We can snatch the knight. Only way to recapture back is queen takes, and then we have this royal fork, beautiful royal fork on f3, hitting everything and winning the queen.
Let's give white just a random move and then show it. Okay, so we'll go a3 for white.
Okay, so if we take here, or not take here, play g5, and if they try to take the pawn, tactics time. So take here, only move here, queen takes, and we can land the royal fork, and possibly checkmate to come. I guess white can extend the game a little further if they really want to by playing here, but we're going to win the queen.
Yeah, this is a really fun position. This is a great attack. So once I saw g5, g4, I knew we had to go for this line, and I knew we had to include it in the repertoire.
Yeah. So wonderful attacking game here. Just keep in mind all these pieces coming into the game, even like a rook lift sometime, and just, it doesn't really work here, but getting these rooks into the game is going to help a lot too. And tons of pressure on white here. You don't want to be playing this position as white.
Yeah, that's right. And the rook lift can come into play, or sometimes there's even like rook takes e3 ideas, depending on what white does. So there's a lot of attacking potential for us.